Good afternoon. Crowd's thinned a little bit since this morning, but that's okay. I'm excited here to be joined by Sam and Karen to kind of talk through the future of media. Before we kick off, I'd just love for you to introduce yourselves and kind of talk through the remit of what your organization has before we kind of start painting the story of future in 2023.
Hi, everyone. I'm Karen Crawford. I head up the Media Center of Excellence at Nestle USA. Just hit 30 years with the organization. So when you talk about future of media, I've been living the future of media, the evolution of media, but our remit is really to think about where we can intersect with the consumer, bring the creative. I see my creative partner in front row here, Renee, and how do we bring that together to really enhance the consumer experience, but importantly, help our brands grow, as you know, really trying to make the media piece. It's not just the numbers, it's not just efficiency, but how do we have that leverage and amplification through media?
And hi, everyone. Sam Niburg. Almost as long as Karen has been at Nestle, I've been in Constellation. I'm coming up on a little bit over 4 months. And for those of you who don't know Constellation, I'm sure you do know our brands. So we are a big player in the beverage alc space, beer, wine, and spirits. Some of our beer brands, Corona, Modelo, Pacifico. Some of our wine brands, Meiomi, Kim Crawford, Robert Mondavi. We have Svedka Vodka. We have Casa Noble Tequila, High West whiskey. So I wish I'd brought some for those of you that stayed behind this late. So my role, and you know, I'm 4 months in. My role is also 4 months in. So I head up a group within Constellation. We call it Digital Business Acceleration. I head up a group focusing on wine and spirits. My job with my cross-functional team is basically to build the muscle and the testing needed to then unlock new growth opportunities. So basically what we do is constantly look at like, where should we play, put tests into market, learn from them, and whatever works, we scale into our BAU, business as usual campaigns, right? So very different type of application to media, but very much in line with hopefully uncovering what the future looks like.
Yeah, appreciate that. So again, contextualizing, we've got CPG focuses here, right? So everything we're going to be talking through has that lens to it. And so as we were talking and thinking through what topics to cover for the future of media, especially as we get into 2023, one theme came up, which is evolution, right? Feel like since COVID the media landscape has changed a lot. The marketing landscape has changed a lot. Consumer behavior has changed a lot. And there's been a lot of fads or trends where I think us as marketers were trying to figure out, is this going to stay? Is it not going to stay? What is the game plan? And we're getting to the point in 2023 where a lot of those are going to be evolving to impacting our actual media strategies, right? And so that's the theme we're going to take through today. The first one is very macro, right? When we talk about evolving your market or your media specifically within a recession, right? So whatever you define a recession to be, the fact is 2 quarters or whatnot, right? It has to do with the fact that consumers' pockets are tightening, budgets are tightening. I was on a panel with A&A when COVID just started, and the president said, for every quarter you go dark, it takes you 5 quarters to bring back market share, right? So we can all theoretically think through, yes, we should stay in market. I'd love your takes from a media perspective of what that means staying in market when budgets are being looked at very closely, right? And even the tone of being in market during that time, and kind of take it to you on your takes and what your brands are doing throughout a recessionary period or contracting budget period.
I mean, I think from a Nestle perspective, it's always been about making sure that our media dollars are working effectively, right? And it's not about just efficiency, but how are we driving growth, as you mentioned as well, Sam. So I think for us, spend is volatile. It's been impacted by everything that you mentioned. It's been impacted by supply chain. But what we want to do is think about, how do we best spend? How do we best reach our consumers? How are we thinking about, you heard Mel talk about the and world we live in. It is about, you know, business, short-term and long-term. How are we thinking of all of that? And our plans are really trying to build the flexibility and the agility that we need for our different situations, because every brand with their consumer segments is very different. But I think, to your point, we still see value in what we're doing. And I'm not just talking about upper funnel here. I'm talking about full funnel. I see some of our Omni friends in the crowd as well. So we're really thinking about what is that total consumer experience? How are we spending money in the best and most effective way? But we do believe in looking to invest, whatever that amount is, and do the best we can.
Yeah, and I think what you said at the end there about value, I mean, that's what it's all about. I think as marketers, we develop and build value for our business by delivering value to our consumers. And I think that's especially important in a recession where people are strapped for cash. Like, how do we as marketers, add value to them, right? In a thoughtful, purposeful way. So for us, I mean, we are, not cheap wines, right? We tend to compete in the premium category. So how do we make sure that we are showing up in a way that's contextual, but also relevant to them? How do we make sure that we're not showing off in a way that, is tone deaf, right? Especially when someone is struggling to put food on the table. But I do think it comes back to, delivering value and also being very choiceful as marketers on where we spend. Like, and for me personally, I mean, our team is about testing and innovation. If you've gone through this before, that tends to be the first place where you cut, right? Because it's not an immediate impact on short term, but the question that we have to ask ourselves is like, what's the cost of not doing? What's the cost of not investing, right? We know, if anything, from COVID, like disruption, it's not a if, it's when, right? And how do you build the capability and the muscle memory to adapt to whatever comes next, right?
Yeah, and I think even building on that, when you think about reinforcing that message with consumers on why our brands can deliver what they need when they need it, creating that relevancy for them, that messaging and that steady investment or voice out there. And it doesn't have to be, high-end big budgets. It's how do we find ways to connect, paid, organic, everything that we can do. So to build on, that overall value, but keeping our voice out there so consumers feel that reinforcement, that the choices that they're making and selecting our brands are the right ones.
Yeah, I think one common theme is, consumer first, right? And adding value, your brands are adding value to that consumer. In a recession, what are the consumer is looking for value. So what is the most efficient way to get that across them in an effective way, right? Double clicking into the media side of it, if we could a little bit. So holistically, I think we're on the same page. Everyone gets it. What does this do for either media planning or your media mix when you're coming into a recession and budgets are going to be looked at a little tighter?
I would say there's no planning season anymore. It's forever planning, but I think that's a good thing, right? Because we're able to react to what the consumer changes are, how do we connect with them? But it also makes us think about not just where we're placing our ads, but also how we're negotiating, how we're actually going into the marketplace. How are we leveraging the digital revolution, not only to spend more in the digital arena, but how do we transact in a more digital way, in a more real-time way, and being able to optimize and leverage consumer data. So that's been a good lean in of some of the turning the tables and taking a difficult situation, making it a positive.
Yeah, and I do think you definitely want to build in the flexibility, right? So you have the capability and the wiggle room to adapt. In some cases, you can't, right? Like TV upfronts, like you have to do that with a certain time frame. But I think the key, and this is a conversation we often have, is like, well, what's your averse or risk tolerance, right? I think the worst thing you can do is take no risks, right, when that happens. But you have to take smart risks. And I think, I don't want to plug my team, but that's part of what we try to do as well. Like we try to learn smart, fail smart, hopefully. Like let's if we're going to test something, let's test it in small scale so we can afford to walk away. But that's really the conversation we keep having. If there's something that's an unknown vehicle, like my guidance to the brands is don't spend big. Let's find this sweet spot, like to dip our toes, especially now, right, when we have to be very, very choiceful.
Yeah, I test and learn, right? We hear it a lot. We have to live it even more probably as we get into this next year. I want to take the recessionary conversation and pivot to something you just mentioned around TV, right? So linear TV is something that is much more ingrained and difficult to be flexible with, right? But it has its purpose. I think we've seen over the past, 2 years, consumption of TV change quite a bit. The thing that comes to mind that seems to be the buzzword right now as we think about TV is Netflix. I'm not sure how they can get away with charging you a subscription and showing you ads, but we'll see when everything launches this year. What's your initial take on it? Underrated, overrated, worth the steep CPM? Like what's your and your brand's take on it?
On Netflix, I think they're doing what we're all trying to do, is figure out what the growth opportunity is for them with subscriptions, kind of tapering off, that was one of the areas. They're seeing the competition across platforms. Think about Disney Plus and some of the others like Paramount Plus, where the big TV companies have now become competitors to them because they have content. So I think they had to lean in. How we lean in with them is where we're all trying to figure out, right? Yes, they're charging a lot for some of the initial advertisers, but we're looking at it from a perspective of, let's see how it plays out. Let's see the performance. But the CPM isn't as scary if the performance is there. So if the CPM is 10x and the performance is above that, why not, right? But that's really kind of this first year for them. They're also figuring it out because they haven't really yet determined what is that impact. Some of the scale, they're still going to be pretty small in year one. And so we're really trying to monitor that reaction. To your very point, pay $7.99 and you'll see ads. Right. But you're going to see some of the other platforms maybe follow them as well. So it's test and learn, try, adapt, and build.
Yeah, and as a team, we also kind of divide up and we kind of say like, what's on the horizon? Should we go? Should we wait? Should we, not do it? The current take for us is also wait and see. And I think as a brand, as a marketer, whenever you have a new opportunity like that, you got to ask yourself a couple of questions. Number one is like, is there a first mover advantage? Can you get some sort of exclusivity by going first? In this case, it doesn't appear to be, right? And I think there's a lot of questions around, how does this fit in? You mentioned measurement and performance, right? Like, what does that look like? So right now, maybe in 6 months, this will change, right? But right now, we're also taking a wait-and-see type of approach, especially given the recessionary pressures as well.
Yeah, I mean, you think about even during the upfront this year, we had mergers happening as we were negotiating. Think about Warner Media, right? Disney Plus launching now, right, as we're thinking about it. So when we build our plans and build in the fluidity, thinking about how do we maybe hold back some money and look at this. It's like your test and learn world. How are we building it in so we don't lose the opportunity when it's right for us?
Yeah, I think that's all fair. And when we think about Netflix, right, that's in a bigger bucket of connected TV, right? And so when you talk about need for flexibility in a recession, being able to be more nimble, connected TV is pretty interesting. Based on what you've seen from your consumers, what have their consumption habits changed, or how have they changed or evolved since COVID? And do you forecast that being the case as you're doubling or investing more? I won't use the term doubling down, but investing more into CTV?
Yeah, and I think we've seen a continuation of the COVID trends. I think it changed a lot of things from a consumption behavior and channel behavior. From a media, I think it's been something over time, and I think COVID accelerated. I mean, we've definitely seen an increased fragmentation across the media landscape. We definitely see viewing trends obviously shifting more towards CTV and digital, and as brands, I mean, we've shifted that way too. Now we still have a lot of spend in linear, especially on the beer side, but wine as well, because it does serve a purpose. But we are constantly evaluating the direct media mix, and that's part of what my team does as well, but also from a BAU perspective, right? Like, what does that look like? It is very challenging though, because it's not so much like which vehicle by itself; it's the combination of vehicles, right? And what are the synergies? And that comes back to like the whole measurement, MMM, MTA, you name it, right? Especially as a CPG, we don't have the closed loop.
That's right.
And for us, it's been very much a part of our strategy moving forward. I think for the Nestle marketers in the room, they'll be here, they heard us talk about advanced video. How do we lean in? How are we partnering in not only being able to spend more in that arena, because it's not just that it's digital and it's streaming, it's we can transact digitally. We can apply data. We can apply more consumer targeting to it. We hopefully will get to, full optimization through, information and performance. But it is the wave, I would say, of the future. And I think, we continue to lean in. We've definitely pushed along with our agency partners to try to take advantage, because above all else, it also builds in flexibility. We're able to, not have to commit to an upfront 6, 9, 12 months in advance, and we can be more fluid with what we activate in CTV.
Yeah, I think I like what you said there, and we've been seeing this a lot with our brands too, is just bringing real-time bidding or programmatic ecosystem or addressability into TV because the reach is so large, right? How can we make it smarter, right? And CTV allows us the opportunity to do that. Thinking of channels, TV, long-standing, evolving. Let's talk to something that's a little bit new on the RMN side of it, right? So I feel like it wasn't that long ago where everything was so simple, right? There was shopper marketing, and then there was brand marketing, and they were completely separated and bifurcated. And since COVID specifically, right, we've seen a big uptake in retail media networks, right? Specifically this year, this creating a lot of the retailers are looking for ways as their margins get cut to be able to monetize their assets, which makes sense. So I guess with the role of retailer media networks coming in, what role do they fit within your media plan and media mix as a whole, and to what scale?
I mean, for us, that is very important because the retailers are not only within the media environment, but more importantly, they're our conduit to our consumers. So partnering with these retailers is giving us multiple areas to be able to lean in. It's being able to leverage their platforms and their consumers and their understanding. It's being able to connect that from an e-commerce perspective. It's also looking at it from data. You know, when we talk about like some of the companies that were up here that are more direct marketers, or even a hospitality or a airline, that they have the ability to have more closed loop, more consumer information. So everything we can get from the retailers and be able to leverage it, whether it be in their platform or elsewhere, is important. And then also it's that transition point because they know their space, but they're also having to understand the broader media context. They have to be able to play now against a Disney, you know, against some of the, you know, the scripts and so on. And so that's new territory for them. So the more we can think about it from a holistic partnership, that we all benefit and figure out how to move forward because they are our partners along that consumer journey. And it's really important that we, you know, think about how we can work together to help grow our brands.
Yeah, and for us, and this was new to me coming into this category in alcohol. There's a lot of regulations that prohibits what we can and can't do. For those of you that are familiar, like we are in a 3TE, three-tiered system. We sell to distributors, they sell to retailers. By law, they have to be separate. And there's also these laws that actually go back, some of them, you know, pre-prohibition, these tied house laws, where we actually can't, pay for, premium shelf space, whether it's digital or in store, directly to retailers. So it does take a lot of options off the table. That being said, there are other type of, whether it's marketplace or agents like Instacart, right? Instacart is not a retailer. They're basically an agent of retailers. Where it's still some regulations that we have to manage, but it is possible, right? And we're actually doing some tests with them right now, and with banner ads and looking at, purchase behavior. And then you have marketplaces as well. I don't know if anyone's like tried Drizzly or GoPuff. We talked about, right, where they deliver, but they're working with local, wine and beer shops, right, to deliver those products. That being said, though, I mean, we have the same challenge, right? And I think one of the huge benefits, data being one of them, but it's like meeting them where they are in the funnel, right? You know they're closer to purchase when they're there. And for us, and we've seen this in search behavior. Beer, people search for brands, like they would search for a Corona or a Modelo. Wine, not the same behavior. They will search for like Cab or Pinot or Sauvignon Blanc. So for us to try to establish our brands, I mean, the further down we can get in the funnel to impact and influence that, obviously, the more impactful that could be. So we have to think a bit more creatively around that. And a lot of it is working with the retailers. We know that someone that puts alcohol in their basket, right, they're more valuable, it's higher margin, et cetera, right? So we can't pay directly, but it's like, how do you help build that business case and work through it that way?
Yeah, I think it's really interesting. A couple of things you both said. You don't own your own data or sales data for the most part. D2C isn't huge, right? So the retail media network is also your way into the consumer, right? That engagement point. And when we talk about maybe the consumer journey, right? You mentioned lower funnel or upper funnel. I almost feel like things are collapsing at this point, right? Quite a bit. So how do you think about that from a media planning standpoint? When you look at, it's a zero-sum game, right? So as we have budgets, how are you planning across the different aspects with retail media now there? And focus, is the consumer at the focus, or how does that exercise work?
It would be nice to say that we've had it all figured out, but I think what we've done is with the way we're organized, with the intention of all in service of the same, business opportunity, we have come up with some races to be able to manage through it. But what's really important is that we think about it holistically. We're starting to have more conversations about total planning. And we have folks like on our teams working with folks in the sales organization and with brands to try to say, how are we looking at it? We're working with our CMI analytics partners to say, can we get to a stronger total commercial measurement so that we are able to be able to prioritize? And it's not a one versus the other. It's how do we do it all, but do it all effectively and be able to find that right prioritization, that right balance. So it's not just a very simple versus a we've figured it out, we are working, but a lot of ways to still go to make it more ingrained in how we think. Because, I totally agree. We're hearing funnel less, collapsing of the funnel, whatever the case may be. But again, it is important that we figure out at least the now as we're building to how do we eventually work into a much more fluid situation.
Yeah, and I do think the challenge with collapsing the funnel, that might sound good in theory on our presentation, but in reality, you need different expertise, different skill sets, and different tactics, right, depending on where you're on the funnel. But the worst thing you could do, I don't know if it's worse or not, but is to have silos, right? And I think I don't think anyone's solved it. Like at Constellation, I don't specifically work on it, but we have a team that looks at 3TE, that's our focus, e-commerce. We have obviously a media team I'm part of, and everything in between, like the brand folks, right? But I think the biggest piece is what you said, is like having the right visibility, the right planning up front, and then the right feedback loop on what you learn. And my team as well, when we think about tests, it depends on the brand, it depends on the consumer we're going after, the business opportunity, like where in the funnel does it make sense to try to tackle? And then how are we super clear about the behavior change we're trying to drive? And it can't be awareness to purchase right away, or very rarely. It's about awareness to consideration, or like no awareness to awareness. And then the follow-up question is, well, how do you measure that? But
Yeah, and I think even, right, how we're doing a lot on the team and working with our Omni team and research, trying to figure out what's that interconnectivity? Television does drive search. Search does lead to digital shelf. All these things are so interconnected, and that gray area now is the opportunity that we're all trying to figure out how to manage through and capitalize on.
Yeah, I think one of the things, so I agree with all that, and I think your perspective on the funnel is, as much as we idealistically would like to collapse it, does serve different specialties and purposes. One of the things that I think I've seen, at least in the space, is the evolution of data being, the use of data being evolved a bit since RMN came in, right? A lot of third-party data is purchase-based data, but now the RMNs have that, right? So then holistically thinking about the consumer is at the center of the journey. What role does data play in different types of data in your media strategies?
Yeah, and actually this has been a big push around this whole digital business acceleration initiative, because the point is you should base all decisions, at least your hypotheses, on data. So if you think about it, data by itself doesn't mean anything. It's about the context around it. So we've made a huge investment. I can't take credit for any of it, right? Behind, first of all, access to the data, and that includes, IRI, hopefully some other retailers that are not captured in IRI. It's about getting access to it. It's about ingesting it. It's about scrubbing it. It's about visualizing and then democratizing. So we're not all the way there, but we made a lot of progress in terms of the ingestion part. And now, that's actually a lot what we work on in my team as well, is based on these, collection of insights, hopefully separating the signals from the noise. What are the hypotheses that we think will happen if we do this or this or this? And that's oftentimes how we design our tests, right? This is what we think will happen. The test will validate or invalidate it, right? And then that kind of creates the feedback loop of completing the data and the picture that the data tells us.
Got it.
And I think if you think about data, you can think about it in a couple ways. If you think about data in just understanding your consumer, how are we getting information about our consumer? When you talk about first-party data, if we can get deeper than emails and those types of things to really understand the contextual importance and I would say, affinities of our consumer. So think about it just in that overall better understanding of the consumer, all the way down to what you talked about, which is how do we then take that data, activate against it, and then get more data to show performance and continue that loop? Because I think that's the dream state, is when we can really get that grounding in what does first party, third party, whoever has that data give to us to better, you heard Mel talk about our North Stars, our consumer. How do we make it about the consumer and then be able to bring that all the way back to performance?
Yeah, the nirvana state, right? The
Yeah,
closed loop,
exactly.
right? I think data's, with everything happening with privacy and cookieless, and I don't know if anyone from Google's here, you could let us know if they're actually going to deprecate the cookies or not. This would be super helpful. But I think what we're seeing a lot is like data is turning into signals almost, right? And then once we have those signals, well, how can we use it to connect with our consumers, create meaningful moments, and then measure the impact of that, right? That loop on it. I'd love your take really briefly, just because I know it's unique to CPG around first party. A lot of folks are investing in first party because a transaction is a first party record for folks like the Vitamin Shop and that spoke earlier in terms of retailers. What is the take from a CPG standpoint on first party data and the role that plays?
It's still important because, those are those that are closest to you. So we have a lot of our organic efforts, whether it be our websites that we own, whether we think about it from our community management teams, all of those. And you talked about signals from search.
Yeah.
That can be organic search, paid search, and we're getting more and more learning. So when you think about first party data, all of those are component. Do we have the same level that an insurance would have, an automotive dealership? No. But I think we still have opportunities with what we have from a consumer engagement opportunity. Even our consumer engagement services team, the call center, they're getting information that's coming in. So I think all of those are what we're trying to wrap our arms around to really say this is first party. For Nestle too, we are a big organization, but within the US, we have Purina. We have our health science business, we have our infant formula business, and we need to figure out how we can do a better job at connecting all of that understanding on the consumer side of things. And then what do we really need to then activate? Because you may not need 50 million data point, names, on your database to be able to effectively activate. But it is still critical, even though we're not in the same position as even one of our brands, which is Nespresso, right? As part of a global Nestle brand.
Yeah, and I think, setting aside the privacy legislation and things like that, but we don't set aside, don't ignore that. No, but the point is, it's about mutual value exchange, coming back to that, right? So, I get worried when I see, the goal being about generating X number of data points or first party data. The goal should be like doing this, leveraging first party data. And I think, a key thing there is like the transparency with the consumer. What do they get as a result? We do generate quite a bit of data. Part of it's like sweepstakes, part of it, CRM, part of it's search, purchase data as well. But the key question is like, what do you do as a result of that? And hopefully that helps you build more relevance, right? Like we talked about before, like making the most in terms of delivering the value at the right times in the right way. So we're not wasting our efforts. We're not wasting, hopefully, their short attention spans either.
I think that all makes sense, right? It's all going back to the consumer, right? The core of media as a whole, right, is to make sure the consumer is front and center, and then doing everything you can to build your brand for that. Going through those 70,000 ads they see a day, or a week, how are you going to stand out? So as we talked about evolution of the macro economic status. We talked about RMNs. We talked about TV. We talked about data. Let's talk a little bit about measuring success and like what the right frameworks are for activating on this, right? I think it was Mel earlier said, I need to put out the fire in my house, but I still want a garden, right? So you can't lose sight of the long term versus the short term. What are your thoughts on, as we get all these new iterations and you're continuing to evolve new strategies, how are you going to be measuring that sort of impact?
Yeah, and honestly, I think you've heard that today too. Like no one necessarily has that answer. I'm super jealous of brands that do have the closed loop, where you can see every part of this funnel and you can see kind of where you have leaky buckets. We don't, and you guys don't in most cases either. So I think it's about triangulation. It's part art, part science, right? I think we have tools available to us, the traditional ones, the marketing mix modeling, you have MTA. But then how do you find that sweet spot where you can start to triangulate what works, what doesn't work, both on a macro level, but I mean, in my case with test and learns, I mean, if we put something into market and leave it there for 4 weeks, get enough scale, like how do we get a read if this works? Like we set out like we want to drive this behavior change. Like what is the proxy for measuring that? And then on a higher level, what is the ultimate business impact of something like this in combination with something else? So I mean the answer is like it's evolving. Like we're trying to build like a fuller picture, and I think there's no silver bullet. It's a combination of the tools that we have available to us, and then like how do we then like set up the right testing to validate those?
And we talked about this a bit earlier in the hallway too. It's like mix is an important part of ours. We talked about it's not the tool, it's a tool, right? And we want to think about other ways to measure and how are we looking at it from a cadence perspective as well, right? Mix is a look back at a year ago. How do we look at what's now, what's happening now? How can we take some of the tools like even an IRI does have to be able to do real live optimizations, to think about how do we turn that into predictive scenarios. And so that's really what we're looking at. How are we looking at all aspects of that journey to be able to measure? And it seems like, it's an industry challenge. I mean, we're part of the ANA and we're leaning in from a measurement globally from the WFA. They're trying to figure this all out too. But the intention, I would say, is still about trying to do that test and learn, to be able to not be frozen because you don't have perfect data. And so thinking about some of the opportunities that Sam was mentioning, but also for us at Nestle, how do we do both? Because we have to be fiscally responsible, but it shouldn't handcuff us from being prepared for what's next.
And I do think, I mean, let's think about the variables and the levers too. Like you could have the right media buy, but the wrong content, right? That's right. So it's often like the why. And yeah. I mean, oftentimes like it's like a false positive or a false negative is almost more hurtful, or it hurts you more because then you're walking away from something that could work if you'd done it differently. So I always push back when we get to these like black and white conclusions, right? Like, well, this proves that we shouldn't do this. Is that the conclusion, or is it like we shouldn't do it this way here, right? But it is very hard to isolate those variables.
Yeah, causation versus correlation are very different, right? And tough to break apart.
No, I was just going to say I have a T-shirt that says that. Oh, really? Correlation does not equal causation. Yeah.
You should have worn it. So as we're kind of getting towards the end of it, I think we've talked a lot about what the future is going to hold. A lot of gray space, right? Nothing is black or white. Things continue to evolve. The consumer remains to be at the core, so that's the focus of everything we do, the signals and balance, right? Balancing new channels, existing channels, brand growth, short-term sales are all themes here. As we wrap, I'd love to get your take. Like if we're sitting on the stage a year from now and you're looking back on 2023, how would you define 2023 as being successful?
I mean, from a very basic perspective, it will be our brands and every dollar invested led to growth and connection with our consumer. That said, how did we do it? So it's like the what and the how, right? We do, Nestle, it's like we're in PDP time. So it's like, how do we achieve everything? Is as important as like what are we achieving so that we can continue to iterate. So it's not a very specific, because Sam and I joke like we don't know what the environment's going to look like 2 months, 3 months from now, but being able to pivot and being able to take advantage of whether it be a learning opportunity is really where I see success.
Yeah, and maybe I'll start with like where I don't want to be, and that is like we did a ton of work, we're all burnt out, and we had nothing to show for it. And I mean, I'm standing up a new team at Constellation, and new capabilities. I mean, to me, the success, knowing full well this is going to be a journey, but at this time next year, what I'd like to be able to say is, first of all, we unlocked real meaningful business value that we wouldn't otherwise have gotten to, and we did so in a more efficient and faster way. But number two is about we built a new muscle that we didn't have before as a company, because that's the other piece of it, right? It's like learning how to learn. And hopefully by working in these ways, we're going to scale test learnings into BAU. We're also going to test, hopefully, the process and the ways of doing business differently into the BAU. And that's really, we're not going to be all the way there a year from now, but hopefully we can say that we are on track to get there.
North Stars. So I appreciate it. I appreciate the conversation and the dialogue that we've had. Yeah, I think that's, I don't know who I'm looking at, but I think that's all we got, right?
Over here, that's good. Thank you very much.